Hello all. So it has been a little time since I've made a video, and so I wanted to come on and talk to you all today just about my life as a school psychologist and also talk to you all about education just in general. I've been working as a school psychologist licensed for the past 3 years, but I've been a school psychologist intern. With being a school psychologist intern, I've been doing it for 4 years. And what I will say is I really very much enjoy school psychology. I very much enjoy being a school psychologist. The latitude of a school psychologist is very broad. There's so many different things that you can do. I've made several videos about it, and so you can definitely look at those videos on my channel. Now, what I will say is that working in education in general is very challenging. It is very challenging. There's a lot of politic and a lot of bureaucracy that takes place in education that really prevents a lot of things from getting done. Really, it's kind of like when you work in, let's just say, a counseling facility, right? And you very much enjoy meeting with your clients, but the problem a lot of the time is a lot of the coworkers that you are working with. It's a lot of drama, right? Well, education is very similar, wherein because of a lot of the bureaucracy that takes place in the laws and things like that, you wind up in a situation where you really feel like you are running a race but going absolutely nowhere. I try to explain so many times throughout a school year that ineligibility doesn't necessarily change a kid's circumstances. In other words, just because someone gets a label, a special education eligibility, doesn't mean that they are going to get any better. This is especially true for individuals who have significant behavioral challenges. Now, a lot of kids in the schools, they'll present with behaviors like oppositional defiance and school-based conduct. Oppositional defiance being basically anytime they're told anything to do anything by authority, they're doing the exact opposite. When they are told to sit down in their seat, well, they're up and leaving the classroom. When they're told to go out into the hallway, then they're seated in their seat. You know, that sort of oppositional defiance. And then in terms of school-based conduct, that's where we get the skipping class, the truancy. That's where we get the destruction of property, stealing people's property. That's where we get the bullying, the fighting, disrespecting not only their peers, but also authority. And so a lot of that school-based conduct, a lot of the times when kids are engaged in those types of behaviors, people want emotional disturbance, psychological evaluations done. And I always try to explain to staff that, listen, an emotional disturbance eligibility isn't going to necessarily fix that type of behavior. We call oppositional defiance and school-based conduct, we call that, social maladjustment. That's basically what it is, oppositional defiance and school-based conduct. And putting an emotional disturbance eligibility on that, you then have to question, okay, is this the type of behavior that I want to protect, right? And then you get staff that say a lot of the times, well, we need to just rule it out. Well, we don't rule stuff out, right? It's either when we get together in a staff meeting, we are supposed to talk about what the behavior is, right? And we are supposed to talk about some of the potential causes of the behavior. A lot of times people don't know, they just sit around. But then a lot of times people do know. They do know what the direct cause is of the behavior, and they think that somehow, some way, that doing a psychological evaluation is going to fix the problem. So we're wanting to wait 45 to 60 school days to then come up with a bunch of answers. And on top of that, the student may not even qualify for an eligibility for special education. And so we're wanting to wait all this time, and the kid may not qualify. And we are, again, thinking that the eligibility in itself is going to be the thing that changes all. I've been in meetings where a kid, let's just say, gets an emotional disturbance eligibility put on because everybody thinks that the behavior is so significant, right? They wind up qualifying, and then just this sense of relief just washes over everyone. And then I'm like, I'll be back here in a week or two. And there are several times where I'm back in the schools and I'm going for a disciplinary alternative education placement meeting. We call these manifestation determination review meetings, MDRs, and we have to then determine whether or not the student's behavior was caused by the disability. So let's just say if the student has an emotional disturbance eligibility, which there are specific criteria outlined by the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. There's specific criteria that you have to meet in order to be recognized under that eligibility. And so let's just say the kid continues with the behavior that everyone wanted a psychological done because of that behavior. Then the kid gets the emotional disturbance eligibility put on. Well, then they want to come back weeks down the road, and then they want to send this individual to a disciplinary alternative education placement, but they're engaging in the same type of behavior that they were before. Well, then a lot of times the school wants to say, well, no, it's not a manifestation of the disability. But I'm like, wait a minute. This was literally the exact same behavior that they were engaging in before that led them to get the psychological evaluation that led them to the emotional disturbance eligibility in the first place. But everybody, no, it's not a manifestation. They need a consequence. Well, you see how people want their cake and they want to eat it too, right? And this is, again, why I try to tell people we have to be very clear on the behavior that is an emotional disturbance type of behavior and behavior that is more aligned with the social maladjustment. But then again, I tell people all the time, we have to be very careful about just placing this eligibility on any kid, right? It's also very important because those individuals who really do have an emotional disturbance, these individuals who really have significant mental health challenges, not necessarily behavioral challenges, but significant mental health challenges like anxiety, depression. The IDEA uses schizophrenia also as an example of what could be an emotional disturbance, right? Severe mental health challenges, mental health disorders, they all fall under the umbrella of an emotional disturbance. But what a lot of people don't understand is that just because a kid is emotionally dysregulated, which is different from emotional disturbance, emotional dysregulation just basically means that the behaviors, the emotion are not within the typical range that we would normally expect. So let's just say a teacher tells a student to go out into the hallway, and then that student then cusses the teacher out, flips over a chair, and then slams the door. Well, that's emotional dysregulation, but that doesn't necessarily imply that the student has severe mental health challenges or an emotional disturbance. But see, even when explaining that to school staff, it's very hard to understand. It's very hard to understand the difference between emotional dysregulation and emotional disturbance. Emotional dysregulation is an umbrella term. Emotional disturbance is an umbrella term. Emotional disturbance is an eligibility outlined by IDEA. Emotional dysregulation is just an umbrella term, again, to describe behavior that is not within the typical range of emotion and behavior that you would expect given a situation. So now, with all that being said, it's very important that we do not conflate the two. It's very also important that we don't conflate what is a social maladjustment in an emotional disturbance, because that puts individuals that in these kids that really do have mental health problems, it puts them in a situation where now the waters are very muddied, and everybody's going to think that just because you have you have behavioral challenges that you should have an emotional disturbance eligibility put on. And that's not good, because most kids that truly have internalized problems, challenges that are related to their mental health, they don't have the externalized behaviors. Some do, right? But a lot of these kids do not. And so we don't want, again, to conflate the two, because then it really confuses what is and what is not an emotional disturbance. You know, staff thinks that every behavior kid, again, is a kid with an emotional disturbance, even after explaining what the criteria are. Even trying to explain that to people, well, they see a kid who's engaged in behavioral problems, they think, oh, this kid is emotional. Well, yeah, they have an emotional disturbance. Let's do a psychological evaluation. Well, no, they're emotionally dysregulated. That doesn't necessarily imply that they have an emotional disturbance. Okay? And so that's what we have to understand. Emotional dysregulation, it could be caused by an emotional disturbance. It could be caused by mental health challenges, but it could also be caused by social ecological issues that manifest as a social maladjustment that is not an emotional disturbance. And so that's what we have to understand. Emotional disturbance, emotional dysregulation, and social maladjustment are not the same things. They're all different things. Again, social maladjustment being behaviors that are consistent with oppositional defiance and conduct. Emotional disturbance is an eligibility recognized under IDEA, has specific criteria that you have to meet. Usually that's internalized behaviors, anxiety, severe depression, these sorts of things. Emotional dysregulation, again, is just talking about behavior that is not within the typical range that we would expect. So all of those three things are different. We have to understand that. Putting an emotional disturbance eligibility on every kid that has behavioral challenges is not helpful to anyone. Okay? So that's just one of the issues that you have to deal with in education. And sometimes deciding whether or not to pursue the psychological is beyond your control. Sometimes you can say, you know what, nope, based upon this, we do not need to pursue a psychological evaluation. We need to put these things in order. But then what you're up against is a bunch of people saying that, well, we've already done that. We've done the behavior intervention plan. We've done the check-in, check-out. We've done this and we've done that. In reality, most people don't even know what is outlined in the behavior intervention plan. Then you have staff that don't even know that the student has a behavior intervention plan. So you kind of have everybody just kind of doing this. It's like everybody's just kind of doing their own thing. And so then you have to contend with that as a school psychologist. There are a myriad of challenges in education in general that you have to try to manage. And then if you're working for several different schools, you have to deal with that to a certain extent in every school, because every school is different. Every school has its own culture. Every school has its own admin with their own personalities, teachers with their own personalities, and you have to try to navigate all of that, right? And even if you do that very well, you still have to contend and explain the same things to the same people over and over and over. And then sometimes, you know, you have higher ups telling you, well, we're just going to go ahead and pursue it, right? And then we need to also go ahead and streamline this. Despite what the timeline is, the 45 to 60 days, we need to go ahead and get this done, you know. And so then that puts you in a position to almost feel like, well, okay, if we're rushing this psychological evaluation, then that tells me that you already have preconceived notions of what the outcome is going to be. You already have in your mind that, no, they're going to qualify. So then that puts you in a position, that puts unnecessary pressure on you as the school psychologist to then, you know, try to work it to where, you know, but I am not going to work anything. They're either going to qualify because they qualify, or they're not going to qualify because they do not qualify. Rushing this whole process, despite the timeline, is not going to change what the outcome is going to be. What my recommendation is going to be. My recommendation will be based upon the information that I've gathered through the process of doing my psychological evaluations, which would be interviews, doing formal assessment through, you know, rating scales and observations, in doing a review of the student's academic record, behavioral incidences, all of that type of stuff, you know, all of that. And so, you know, whether or not you want to rush delivery a psychological evaluation is not going to influence what my recommendation is going to be to the admissions review and dismissal committee, the ART committee. We have to do better in education. One of the biggest things is we have to understand the social ecological circumstances that contribute to behavior. Not everything can be chalked up to a mental health problem. Not everything can be chalked up to neurodevelopmental challenges. We have to understand that. It is very important that we understand that. I think speaking from just a cultural aspect in the United States, where it's like everyone's diagnosing themselves with something. Everybody thinks that they have something. We're disregarding disposition, personality. We're discarding the social ecological circumstances, how kids are reared, how kids are parented, all of those things. We're discounting all of that, and we're just thinking everything can be chalked up to a neurodevelopmental or mental health issue, and that is not the case. We're forgetting also about stress and the things that stress put on your behavior. We're disregarding grief. We're disregarding a lot of things, and we're just simply wanting to put a label on everything. And that is a disservice to everyone.